I'm a dietitian. I'm also doing my PhD, so doing research on how diet affects inflammation. Though I will say that's more related to chronic diseases such as heart disease and diabetes, but definitely there's some kind of translocation across into liver disease as well, particularly non-alcoholic fatty liver disease. So hopefully my talk's a bit of a change of pace because I've tried to make it really practical so that you can have some take-home kind of ideas of how you might change your diet when you leave here today. I will say that it is a pretty complex topic, and that's because as a dietitian, the types of nutrition recommendations that I would provide to people in their early stages of liver disease are very different to the types of dietary recommendations that I would provide in advanced liver disease or in the late stages. And that depends, of course, on the stage of liver disease, but also on things like comorbidities, so diseases or disorders that you might have alongside your liver disease as well. So with that in mind, today I'm actually going to spend the majority of the presentation talking about dietary recommendations in those early stages of liver disease, which are general health dietary recommendations. Then I'll talk about how those might change as your liver disease progresses. And I think it's always fun to touch on some kind of topical, issues that you might come across if you're Googling, say, liver disease and diet as well. So we'll talk a little bit about herbal supplements like milk thistle, which is a really popular question I get, and a little bit on gut health as well. All right, so what is healthy eating in the early stages of liver disease? Well, what kind of dietary patterns, I guess, would I be recommending? So the Mediterranean diet is a beautiful diet. There's a lot of research around it, specifically in chronic disease as a whole, so in heart disease, diabetes, certainly in liver disease. Before I get into some of the research though, I think it's important to recognise that there's a lot of countries that circulate the Mediterranean Sea, all with very distinct kind of dietary patterns, but where most of the research tends to lie is in the Cretan Mediterranean or Crete Mediterranean dietary pattern, and that's the pattern that I'm going to be talking about most today. In terms of the research, there's heaps of studies, but just to name a few important ones, this style of eating has been shown to reduce the risk of dying from heart disease in people with cardiovascular disease in up to 70% of cases. A 50% reduction in the incidence of things like diabetes and what's called metabolic syndrome in obese individuals. And in liver disease, most of the research, I will say, lies in non-alcoholic fatty liver disease, but certainly there's been a lot of research to show that it's really beneficial in lowering what we call hepatic steatosis, which is just basically fat that's distributed in the liver. Now, there's not a lot, very limited research in your specific patient group in PSC. However, the types of dietary recommendations that we provide to you in early stages of liver disease are general healthy eating to support your health and well-being, and certainly what I'm about to go through in terms of the Mediterranean diet would be recommendations that I would provide regardless. All right, so I want to make this as practical as possible. So I've tried to break this Mediterranean style of eating down into kind of, I guess, call it the 10 commandments, but it's really the 10 core components of this Cretan style Mediterranean diet, in the hope that you can take home one or two things that you might be able to change in your diet when you go home. So the very first one is using extra virgin olive oil as the main source of added fat in your diet. In fact, in the traditional Cretan diet, they use up to 60 mils, which is about 3 tablespoons. That's a lot. I'm not saying that you have to be using that every single day, but I think the take-home message is not to be afraid of fat. Fat is great for us as long as we're getting the right types of fat, and in extra virgin olive oil in particular, it's really rich in monounsaturated fatty acids, which are really beneficial for overall health. I will say that in PSC in particular, if you are experiencing steatosis, which I will absolutely touch on later, then maybe you would need to consider the amount of extra virgin olive oil you have in your diet, but certainly it can still be in there as well. The biggest recommendation that I would provide would be making sure you're getting extra virgin olive oil and not light olive oil or regular olive oil, and that's because those types of olive oil that are light or regular and they don't say extra virgin, they've been processed so much that they don't contain all of the beneficial components that you get from extra virgin olive oil, like polyphenols. Has anyone heard the term polyphenols before? Yeah? So they're components in our food that are really beneficial for our overall health. They act as antioxidants, okay, which basically In really simple terms, they help to fight these things called free radicals running around our body that can do quite a bit of damage over the long term. So they kind of help to neutralise those, and those are the types of things that you might get in extra virgin olive oil, and that's why you need to make sure you get extra virgin and not the other types as well. This brand in particular, I always like to put throughout my presentations when I'm working with patients specific product recommendations, because I find that they, it's helpful to know not just what to do, but how you can kind of put that into practice. All right. Yes?
I recently found MCT coconut oil. Is that the same or better or not really?
It's a good question. Do you have problems with fat malabsorption?
No, but I read it's very easy to digest, maybe better than olive oil. Is that correct?
Okay, so that's a really, really good question, and it really depends on the individual and the context. In general, so if we're just talking about people that can absorb and digest fat really, really well, they don't have any issues with, they don't have steatorrhea, then coconut oil actually wouldn't be the better choice. So coconut oil is actually extremely high in saturated fats in particular. In fact, it's higher than the amount of saturated fat you'd find in lard, for example. There is research going on to look at the size of the fatty acid chain lengths, and that gets overly complicated. In general, I would say that if you absorb fat well, no, I'd actually be sticking to something like an extra virgin olive oil. There's a lot more research to support how beneficial it is in overall health. However, if you are malabsorbing fat, then there is sometimes we'll use things like MCT oils, because medium chain triglycerides don't actually require bile for digestion. But to be honest with you, that's getting really complicated. It's not something you'd probably be doing on your own, but if you were malabsorbing fat, that's something you could probably talk about with your dietitian.
I have a question. So you say have coconut oil is saturated. So saturation means the number of hydrogens attached to the carbon chain, right?
Yeah,
So
absolutely.
if it's, I understood coconut oil was 100% saturated, and I thought that therefore in heating there's no denaturing of the oil, the carbon chain, whereas in olive oil there is denaturing at heating. So do you have any advice on cooking with these oils? Because it's one thing to just drink 60 mils of oil from a bottle. It's another thing to cook with it.
Yeah. So there's some really good research that's coming out at the moment. That's such a fantastic question, one I get all the time. So what Alex is basically saying is with coconut oil, because it is so saturated, it isn't, so when we heat oil to a really high temperature, it can form kind of rancid molecules like acrylamide and things like that, which can be detrimental to our overall health. There was a train of thought that saturated fats, well, it is true, saturated fats have a high smoke point, which means we can heat them much more to higher temperatures over longer periods of time without them forming those kind of nasty byproducts. But there is actually a lot of research coming out at the moment that actually has shown they've compared coconut oil and really good quality fresh extra virgin olive oil. They've heated them both to really high temperatures using a number of different methods. And in fact, extra virgin olive oil ended up coming out on top in terms of those types of formation of those nasties, because when you're getting extra virgin olive oil, it's got all of those protective polyphenols in it, which can actually help to prevent that rancidity. So I can see where you're coming from, but I would say there's promising research showing that in fact extra virgin olive oil can be heated to higher temperatures, especially in the everyday kitchen where you're baking with it or cooking with it or maybe doing a stir fry. And in the context of an overall healthy diet, it doesn't mean you only use extra virgin olive oil, but I would say it would still be your main cooking and dressing fat in general. Does that kind of make sense? Wow, we got stuck on that one for a while. Hopefully we get through the presentation, but by all means ask as many questions as you like. The second main component of the diet is getting lots of fresh veggies in. So often you'll hear dietitians speak a lot about serves of vegetables, having 5 serves of vegetables per day. I find that can get a little bit complicated, so what I tend to recommend is make sure that you're having vegetables with lunch and dinner, and even better that you're having half a plate of vegetables with lunch and dinner. And you should be getting towards your 5 serves a day, and that does not include potato, which we'll talk about in a second. The other thing is to make sure that you're having a range of colours in your vegetables, because all the different coloured vegetables provide lots of different vitamins and minerals, and they also provide carotenoids, which are the plant pigments that kind of colour the vegetables, which again are antioxidants in the body, etc. So half a plate of veggies at lunch and dinner, making sure you get all the different colours. And the other recommendation would be to eat the skin, and that's because all of that beautiful fibre, which is really good for our bacteria, the bugs that are living inside our large bowel of our colon, keeps them nice and healthy, lives in the skin, so keep the skin on. Unless perhaps you have ulcerative colitis or IBD and you're having an active flare-up, then maybe the recommendations would change, but we'll touch on that in a second too. Alright, the third component of the diet is simply to get some fresh fruit in every single day. So that's about 1 to 2 serves. You don't really need much more than 2 serves, and it's fresh fruit, not dried or juice. And a serve is basically one of the larger fruits like bananas, oranges, apples, or 2 of the smaller fruits like stone fruits or kiwi or mushrooms. And again, eating the skin. And the easiest way to get these guys in is to have them between meals as snacks, yes.
Is there anything wrong with having more than that in either of these?
I would say, just in general, I tell people not to have too much fresh fruit because even though it's extremely nutritious for us, it still is high in sugar. And so 2 serves per day is really plenty. It's ideal, in fact. So 1 to 2 serves, probably don't need to go over that in general. Yeah? Did you ask that question because of fructose or?
Because I eat a lot of fruit.
Oh, right. And again, everything I'm about to say depends on the context of the individual, probably even more of a reason why it's good to go see and speak to a nutritionist or a dietitian. The fourth component of this Mediterranean style diet is getting lots of legumes and lentils in. So ideally, you should be having around 2 meals based on legumes and lentils per week. Does anyone here eat? So legumes and lentils are things like chickpeas, lentils, butter beans, red kidney beans. Does anyone? Yeah, I see some people nodding.
But what if they give you gas?
Yes, that's a good question too. So again, so if you don't have IBD or IBS, which is irritable bowel syndrome, then a little bit of gas, a little bit of bloating from these legumes and lentils kind of tells you that they're working because that's all the fibre, the soluble fibre in them that's feeding all those beautiful bacteria in your large bowel. If you do have ulcerative colitis and you're in an active flare-up, you might not want to be basing too many meals on legumes and lentils because they will cause some issues in terms of how often you're going to the toilet and putting a bit too much stress on your bowels. But again, that depends on individual context. The other thing as well is canned varieties. People get really scared of canned food, which is understandable because they are higher in sodium. But especially in the early stages of liver disease, if you're buying canned varieties, which I do all the time, and you're making sure you're getting no added salt, and you're draining and rinsing them really thoroughly, they're actually a little bit easier to digest than the dried versions that you cook up. Some particular types are even easier to digest if you do get gas, so canned chickpeas and canned lentils are the easiest. And also they're really quick to add to meals. So you can buy the cans, rinse them really well, I add them to my salads at lunch, or you could chuck them in your soups or make a veggie curry based on them. So they're really easy to use. If you're not someone that is cooking with these legumes and lentils regularly, then one of my go-to websites is the Mackenzie's website. They've got heaps of free recipe ebooks that have awesome recipes in there that can get you a little bit inspired. The fifth component of the diet is getting a couple of serves of fatty fish in per week. So fatty fish are things like salmon or tuna or sardines, and this is another really important type of healthy fat called omega-3 fatty acids, which we think have a bit of an anti-inflammatory effect in the body. So they can be converted to these things called eicosanoids, which are basically just signaling molecules that can help to reduce inflammation. Now, in terms of having 2 serves of this per week, it's not too hard really. If you're someone that likes canned tuna or canned salmon or salmon fillets, you can just chuck them in your sandwiches at lunchtime or put them on your salads, or make sure that once a week you have a salmon fillet that you can bake in the oven. So really easy to get into your diet and a really important source of protein as well. The other recommendation, if you do tolerate fat well, would be to eat the skin, because that's actually where all of those beautiful omega-3 fats are located. Yeah.
Is sushi a good option?
Yes, in the early stages of liver disease, yes. Raw fish would be fine, especially if you're having tuna or salmon.
What about smoked salmon? Smoked salmon is that?
So that's an interesting one. Do you know what I would say? Because I do have patients that only like smoked salmon. And in that instance, then yes, I think it's fine if that's something that you add to your diet a couple of times a week, if that means it's one of the ways that you're getting some of these fatty fish in. Yeah. All right, the sixth component of the diet, and a really important one in the Australian diet, I think, and that's that we tend to have far too much red meat, which is things like beef, lamb and pork. So typically, especially in the early stages of liver disease, in a normal healthy diet, 3 serves per week, 3 meals based on red meat per week is actually enough. You don't need much more than that. If you are buying meat, also just making sure you're getting leaner cuts and you're trimming the fat before you cook with it. And if you're cooking with meats that might be higher in fat, like mincemeat's a common one, then you're just getting the extra lean varieties, or the ones that say they have a 5-star rating. And last but certainly not least, it would be that you try and avoid processed meats. So those are things like ham, salami, bacon, chorizo, all the delicious ones which can be enjoyed on occasion. But for example, if you're someone that's having a ham sandwich for lunch every day, a simple swap would be to put a can of tuna or a can of salmon in there. Or have a cheese and salad sandwich instead. So I popped this slide in just because sometimes when I start talking about how you can incorporate, that you need to have more legumes and lentils, more fatty fish, less red meat, it's really hard to visualise what that actually looks like across the week, which is understandable. So this is one example of what it might look like. It doesn't mean this is what you have to go home and do, but it just helps you to visualise that kind of, how to distribute it across the week. So you might decide that for lunch you'll stick to mainly vegetarian stuff, so you might have salads and chuck some lentils or legumes or nuts and seeds in there, or maybe just a cheese and salad sandwich, or you'll have some of that yummy fatty fish in there as well. And then for dinner, that's when you'll distribute your meats. So you might have a couple of serves of red meat per week, a couple of serves of chicken, and then 1 to 2 fish, 1 to 2 legume lentil-based meals. So again, it's not the only way to do it, but it just helps you to kind of understand what that might look like in the context of a healthy Mediterranean style diet. So the 7th core component, and potentially one of the most important, is looking at whole grain carbohydrates. So what you should ideally be doing is choosing low GI whole grains over the high GI refined grains. So basically, in a nutshell, that means choosing brown whole grains over white refined grains. I won't go through every single thing in this list, but it can be really simple swaps that make a big difference. So the obvious one is switching white bread for wholemeal or rye bread. Cereal, just giving away some of your breakfast cereals and choosing plain old rolled oats that you might add some nuts and seeds to. In terms of the grains, really common switches that I see patients making that make a big difference is switching white rice for whole grain rice or brown rice, and even white pasta for wholemeal pasta, or maybe if you're really going to step outside your comfort zone, some pulse pasta made from legumes and lentils, and also trying some different whole grains that you might not have in your diet, like soba noodles, which are like a buckwheat noodle, or maybe some quinoa. So variety is also really important in the context of a nice healthy diet. And again, these recommendations, as I'll go through later, would change if you did have something like grain club as well. Okay, for product recommendations, these aren't the best products made to man, but they're all available at Coles and Woolworths, and they're easy to source. And they're examples of things that would be a better option to say, like looking at the VitaWheats, much better than a salada. Or wholemeal. Does anyone cook with wholemeal pasta? Yeah, sometimes, yeah. Give it a go if you haven't before. You might surprise yourself and it might taste pretty good. And then these ones are popping up all over the place at the moment, so all the pulse pastas. Again, depends on how well you actually digest your foods, but in general, if you don't have ulcerative colitis, if you're not too gassy, as Alex pointed out, then they're a really good option. And just keeping with the theme of carbohydrates, I always talk about potatoes because, again, in a typical Australian diet, we tend to eat too many of them. I'm not saying that potatoes are the devil, they are a vegetable, they're not horrible for you, but you definitely don't need them 4 or 5 nights per week. So I typically tell people, 2 serves of potato per week, which is about, it's a medium potato or kind of the size of the fist of your hand, is plenty. And then, since you might be cutting down the amount of potato you eat, you can replace it with things like peas, corn, legumes, lentils, or all of those really great whole grains that we spoke about earlier. Alright, so the 8th core component of the diet is to include a really good quality fermented dairy product in your diet daily. So this is things like, pretty much is yogurt or kefir. Has anyone used kefir before? Yeah, nice. I see some hands. Yeah, so it's like a fermented yogurt drink, which is actually readily available at Coles and Woolies now, so keep your eye out. They usually keep it in the milk section. If you haven't used kefir before, you can use it in a smoothie. You can actually just tip it over your normal yogurt and mix it in, and it's a really good probiotic and source of calcium, which is why these products are so important. So a good quality fermented dairy product is a really rich source of calcium in your diet, and it's a good quality source of calcium. And for people living with PSC, you are, as we've discussed, at an increased risk of osteoporosis, so it's good to make sure you are getting enough calcium in your diet, and this is one of the better sources of that as well. And it also provides lots of probiotics to keep your gut bugs healthy, which we've kind of touched on. So when you're choosing, again, there's some product recommendations, doesn't mean they're the best ones, but there's some good ones. But when you are choosing these products, just flip it over, look at the ingredients list, and make sure that it is made with whole milk, not cream. And the only other things on there really should be the actual bacterial cultures that they use, so funny words like lactobacillus. The ninth component is a pretty straightforward one that we all know about, but sometimes needs some reminding. So that is simply that sweet foods like cake, chocolate, lollies are eaten on special occasions. So these types of foods, definitely not every day, probably not every second day, maybe once a week, because food is there to be enjoyed, I will admit, but it's not too often. And I guess if you are someone that likes ice cream or chocolate or custard of a night after dinner, then it's simply thinking of things you can switch it for. So it might be some yogurt with some fresh fruit, maybe some chia pudding. Has anyone here ever had chia pudding before? Yeah, some people nodding their heads. So that's just a fun food that you could experiment with. It's made with chia seeds, it's quite high in fibre, so again it would depend on whether you have ulcerative colitis or digestive issues or not. Although it is very well digested in lots of people. Or you could just simply switch some milk chocolate for dark chocolate as well, which is really high in polyphenols. So just some options. And last but not least, which is the 10th component of the Mediterranean diet, is alcohol. So, first of all, I'll tell you how this fits into the Mediterranean diet, and then I'm going to put it in the context of liver disease. So in this type of Christian Mediterranean diet, typically what they'll have is they'll have red wine, that's their preference, which is actually quite high in polyphenols because it's made, in relative terms to other alcohols, it's made with nice dark red grapes. And when they do have red wine in Crete, they tend to have one glass a night, not much more than that, and they'll have it with a meal in a social occasion, and then they might have 2 or 3 alcohol-free nights per week. So how you guys would interpret this slide is I am not saying if you drink, don't drink, that you should start drinking, absolutely not. There's going to be no benefits to doing that, but if you are someone that you are in your early stages of liver disease, of PSC, and you are already drinking, then perhaps this would be a better approach than having 3 or 4 glasses a night, and certainly in general sticking with the Australian dietary guidelines or the Australian guidelines. If you have advanced liver disease though and it has progressed a bit further, then certainly the recommendations change around whether you should be including alcohol in your diet or not. And it would be avoided. We can obviously damage the liver. Alright, how's everyone feeling? That was quite a bit of information. Is everyone good? Any questions? Preferably not too hard ones, Alex?
Probiotic pills. Do you have any views of probiotic tablets?
Yeah, I actually going to touch on that at the end. Do you want to wait until then?
Okay.
Yeah? And if I don't answer your question, then you can ask it in more detail. Yep.
With coffee, so you mentioned before that coffee is quite good for the liver, but then I've also osteoporosis that coffee, like in terms of getting minerals and things isn't great, so I'm a bit confused.
What was the second?
So I think the osteoporosis in terms of getting minerals, and I was told was the coffee, so it can restrict that in some ways. So I guess having both, I'm wondering why.
Yeah, I think that's a good question too. So it can sometimes kind of affect your absorption of calcium with the milk, but not much. So I think, so with calcium requirements, okay, it definitely, it does depend, it's individual context, but you will likely need up to around 1,000 milligrams per day, which is quite a bit. So that's like 3 to 4 serves of calcium, which is like a cup of milk, or 200 grams of yogurt, or 40 grams of cheese, which is like a matchbox size slice. So it's just a fair bit of dairy. And I think that it doesn't, in other words, let me answer your question really simply, it's fine. if you're having like a latte or a cappuccino, you can absolutely count that towards a serve of calcium. Does that answer your question?
Yeah.
Without going into too much
It depends how much coffee you have with calcium. So basically, if you're taking like calcium tablets, don't drink it with a cup of coffee
Yes.
because it inhibits absorption. But so yeah, so it's fine. Coffee's perfectly fine. It's just you don't want to typically have it with your main calcium source.
That's very sensible. Especially if you're having supplementation in your correct thing. Yeah.
Just wondering your thoughts on kind of plant-based vegan diets and also intermittent fasting.
Right. Okay. Fun ones. Well, you might have noticed that the Mediterranean diet is somewhat of, so a plant-based diet is a really loose term. Plant-based diet really means that you're getting most of your nutrition from plant-based sources, which are things like whole grains, fresh fruits and vegetables, and legumes and lentils and nuts and seeds. So those two last categories are plant versions of protein. And then you're having a little bit, but not much of those red meats and chickens and things like that. Which there is a lot of research. Most of the healthy dietary patterns, whether it be Mediterranean, do tend to be more on the plant-based spectrum. Vegan isn't necessarily any healthier though, and often what we find, especially in practice, is that people that take on a vegan lifestyle, and I understand there's moral reasons, animal welfare, etc., it is very hard on a vegan diet to get enough nutrition. In particular, things like calcium, iron, B12. These are all really important nutrients for your everyday functioning and health, in particular when you do have liver disease. So if it's not a moral obligation, then I would say probably steer clear of the vegan diet, just because it can be so difficult to navigate, and already nutrition can be difficult to navigate in the SC. Intermittent fasting. There's actually a research group in my department that's doing a lot of research on this, but in the context of cardiovascular disease. It's in terms of weight loss in particular, it can be effective, and intermittent fasting is also a broad term because you've got, alternate day fasting, or you've got time restricted feeding, things like that. In general though, what we find with that style of diet is that while it does result in significant weight loss over short periods of time, it also results in significant muscle wastage as well. So, which we don't want, muscle loss as well. So, I think certainly in your context, I wouldn't be again recommending intermittent fasting. And across the board, actually, Alex has done. Didn't you do your research on? Yeah. Do you want to elaborate? on
So
that?
I did a study a few years ago, 2013, I think. Looking at intermittent fasting, time-restricted feeding, and I compared that with just general diet and exercise recommendations. And time-restricted feeding was eating between 12 p.m. and 8 p.m. at night, and I thought that really what that would do is that would just reduce calorie intake. So instead of telling people to count calories, I thought they would just simply eat less because they had less time to eat. However, that didn't happen. People just packed it into the same amount of time. But interestingly, so they did lose weight. So but to point to muscle, I'll say in a moment. So they lost weight, they lost less, so they lost more visceral fat, the improvements in insulin resistance over the group that had the basic recommendations. And they lost more liver fat, but the problem was, that they did body comps on everybody, and they lost more muscle mass. So that's terrible, that's not good. Because the problem with, it's fine to lose fat, but if you lose muscle, that is not something you can get back easily. So, yeah, so I was really into it a few years ago, and now I'm not so much.
Yeah, I think when you ask questions about a lot of these diets, it tends to come back to weight loss in particular. And different diets do work for different people, but I will say, especially in your group, in PSC, I think sticking to a plant-based diet, but I would never recommend using any of those extreme types of diets. I don't know if it's really going to be any benefit to you guys, and just sticking to the general kind of healthy eating patterns that I just described would be that's down. Yeah. So I'm gonna, sorry. No, it's alright.
What if you already have muscle loss and is the Mediterranean diet enough to gain back your muscle weight?
Yeah. So if I'm about to talk about some of the later stages or advanced liver disease and how, because the dietary recommendations change a lot. So in that context, a plant-based diet is really a very good choice. Would be my answer to that, which I'll go into actually literally now. In a more advanced liver disease, what is really common is malnutrition. So malnutrition basically is unintentional and quite significant weight loss usually over a fairly short period of time, and in particular, kind of muscle wastage. And in advanced liver disease, we really don't want people to be experiencing malnutrition because it does result in poorer outcomes in terms of complications, even in terms of complications after liver transplant, and so on. Now, the reason that malnutrition, there is a number of different reasons why malnutrition occurs in advanced liver disease, but one of the main reasons is that, so the liver is actually a place where we store spare energy for the body in the form of glucose or glycogen. So glycogen just means spare energy stores. And what happens in a normal, healthy, functioning liver is that when we're fasting, i.e. in between meals, so a good example is overnight, like that 10 to 14 hour fast, our body will use the spare liver stores, energy stores in our liver will be released in order to use that for energy. But in more advanced liver disease, the liver isn't able to store that energy there. So there isn't any spare energy. And what can happen is our body uses other sources of energy like our muscles, and that's why people tend to experience muscle wastage quite quickly. So with that in mind, in advanced liver disease, pretty much everything I said to some degree gets flipped on its head. We actually, first of all, your energy requirements increase, but your protein requirements increase substantially too, remembering that the body's quite quickly using a lot of that muscle mass. So, in fact, sometimes your protein requirements can almost double quite often, which is pretty significant. So what then happens in more advanced stages of liver disease is that we actually prioritise the good sources of protein, which are things like red meat, chicken, fish, to some extent dairy, and legumes and lentils and nuts and seeds, but not quite so much. So we'd actually be encouraging you to have more red meat-based sources at meal times and not so much thinking about the legumes and lentils. It's almost like the opposite. And the other thing we'd be saying is don't actually fill up on those low energy foods like vegetables, because they're not going to provide much energy, certainly no protein. So while they can be a part of your meal, it's not the first thing you can kind of be eating. So you can, just from those two things, and obviously it's on a patient-by-patient basis, and you work closely with the dietitian and your liver specialist, but you can see how as the liver disease advances, that the dietary recommendations will change quite substantially. The second, I guess, kind of complication, especially in PSC, is that you do, from Alex had that fantastic explanation, which I actually learned a lot as well, you get that disrupted bile flow into the small intestine, which, and as Alex alluded to, bile actually helps the body absorb and digest fat in our diet. So if we're not getting enough bile, then it means that we're not going to absorb fat. And what can happen is we can get steatorrhea, which is, the stool isn't always pale, but it's certainly kind of airy, I guess, and fluffy. It tends to float on the water. Usually you will see kind of an oil, like an oily stool surrounding the stool, and it's really difficult to flush. So that's an indication that because you're not getting that kind of bile flow, that you're not absorbing the fat in your diet. In which case, again, it's not something you put yourself on, you talk to your liver specialist and or a dietitian, but you might require a low fat or certainly a lower fat diet to help manage some of those symptoms. And you might also require supplementation with fat soluble vitamins, so that's things like vitamin A, D, E, K as well. And the reason it's quite important to really work with the dietitian in that instance is because you can't just reduce the fat in your diet without losing weight. You also need to make sure that you're increasing your carbohydrate and your protein intake to keep your weight stable. But that's another example of how, when we talked about fatty fish and we talked about extra virgin olive oil, it would be working with the dietitian and working out, I guess, what kind of amount of fat in your diet is appropriate for you.
Have you got a proprietary name recommendation for that vitamin or supplement?
Actually, Alex would be better at the.
No, unfortunately, you have to have them all individually given to you. There's no one. There is. You can get a kind of a mixture of those, but you pretty much, if you're deficient in those, you want individual supplements for each one of these. Is that what you're asking? Like, is one?
Yes, it's like a multi.
Yeah, no. The ones don't have high enough amounts. You know, I mean, vitamin D, for instance, I mean, you can over the counter get a 1,000 international unit supplement, or you can, from a compounding chemist, get a 25,000 international unit supplement. So it really depends on the individual, but certainly you want individual supplements.
Does that answer?
That doesn't happen.
Well, kind of does.
Yeah.
So I have seen products that will combine them all.
Yeah, but they tend to be. It depends how deficient you are. Like, you know, if you just kind of want to keep things and you're not too deficient, that's probably okay. But if you truly have, you know, steatorrhea, you need probably higher doses of these things. Yeah.
I go as well. All right. And then we have ulcerative colitis. So as we've talked about in this presentation already, as Alex touched on, although my percentage is a little bit different to his, but quite a large percentage of people with this probably should be the opposite way around, but with PSC have inflammatory bowel disease, in particular ulcerative colitis. And again, I think this just emphasises how difficult nutrition can be sometimes in liver disease. It would change some of those initial recommendations, especially, I mean, again, compliance depend completely on your context and what's going on in terms of your illness. But if you're having an active flare-up of ulcerative colitis, then you might benefit from having a lower fibre diet and reducing the amount of fibre in your diet. And that's simply because it kind of reduces, so fibre basically promotes movement of food through the bowels, it stimulates the bowels to move. So if you have ulcerative colitis and you're already going to the toilet many times per day and experiencing diarrhea, we want to basically take that extra load and effort off the bowels. And so the way that that would change those initial dietary recommendations, even in the early stages of liver disease, would be that during active flare-up, you might be choosing refined white whole grains over the brown ones, just because you want to reduce the fibre intake to help manage your symptoms. And you might be peeling your fruits and vegetables, because that's where all the fibre is, or cooking them really well as well to help make them more digestible. So again, this may or may not be you, but it shows kind of the complexity. And the other thing that a lot of, well, not a lot, but people with IBD tend to find helpful is a low FODMAP style diet, and that's because it's quite common that you'll also be experiencing irritable bowel syndrome, or IBS, which is more functional gut disorder, and in which case, to help manage those symptoms, we could try something like a low FODMAP diet. So that's a whole presentation in and of itself, but just gives you an idea. All right. I don't want to go over time too much, but so I get this fairly often, whether it's milk thistle or whether it's some other completely different herbal remedy, although I will say milk thistle is the most common in liver disease. So most of the research so far has been conducted in liver disease brought on by alcohol abuse or by like a viral infection like hepatitis. There's actually been a fair few what we call randomised controlled trials, which are just pretty good quality research trials. But overall, they actually have shown no effect on mortality or complications in liver disease, although none of these trials showed any negative effects of taking it either. So I guess when we're talking about milk thistle in particular, it doesn't appear to really have much benefit. I don't think there's any reason you should be taking it, but it also doesn't appear to affect the liver in any negative way. However, and one of the reasons I put this in here is it's a good place for me to emphasise that there are other herbal remedies, say in Chinese medicine, for example, and even really high dosage dietary supplements that can be hepatotoxic, which basically just means that they can damage the liver. And for that reason, if you are wanting to trial some kind of nutraceutical or even put yourself on dietary supplements, you really should be talking to your liver specialist or at the very least your dietitian before you do that. Now, I'm not going to go, because Alex has already been into this, and some of the mechanisms that I describe are a bit different to this, so I won't go into it, but this is talking about the gut microbiome, and it's linked to PSC. In terms of, I'm just going to get straight to the practical component of it, and that is that, no, it doesn't appear to be any specific probiotics in PSC in particular that would benefit your condition. It's just too early to tell. There's no trials to suggest that that's true in any way, shape or form. And in fact, in advanced liver disease, where your immune system might be compromised, it would actually be very much recommended not to be taking any probiotics, because you really don't want to be introducing any kind of foreign organisms into your body. In ulcerative colitis, however, there are certain products with specific strains at very high doses, which have been shown to be effective at managing symptoms, so that's a little bit different. Overall with probiotics though, I will say across the board, because everyone's really into them at the moment, they're in products. I saw the other day children's Vita gummies with probiotics in them. So we work with a specialist food at the department I work at, and they're actually bringing out probiotic gelati. So it's a really popular topic at the moment. Across the board, using probiotics basically we don't really know 100% what we're doing yet. We don't really know what strains we should be using. We don't really know in what amounts. Usually, unless you're immunocompromised, like in late stage of the disease, that would be a time we wouldn't use it. But typically, they don't seem to be doing much damage. So what I usually recommend as a dietitian, if you want to try them, then, because if they do, some people do say they do have effect, and I absolutely use them in my clinic, but you need to really give it a good go, trial the probiotic for 4 weeks, see if you, on an individual basis, notice any benefits, and if you don't, well then give it away. But it shouldn't cause any damage at the very least. But unfortunately, no, there's not a one-size probiotic that's kind of help, certainly in PCS or in any other condition as well. But definitely watch this space because it's a really interesting area. And when it comes to gut health, in general, the research really suggests that fibre has a much quicker and better impact on the microbiome, so all of those bacteria and microorganisms living in your large bowel. In fact, if you up your fibre intake by about 10 grams within the space of 5 days, it can completely change the proportions and somewhat types of bacteria living in there. So I would say that's even more important, like focusing on your diet, which is all the stuff we talked about at the start, is more important than just using a probiotic. That's it. Yeah. You kind of have questions on that. Yeah.
So just a comment on raw activated, I think it is, sauerkraut and kimchi. They're very popular, so both for prebiotic.
Yeah. So with things like kimchi, sauerkraut, so the common fermented foods that you'll find will be like pickled vegetables, kefir, which we talked about, miso. Has anyone heard of miso before? Yeah. There's a few of them. So fermented foods basically means that bacteria is growing in the food and it's eating things like the sugars in the food, and so you get like all these like essentially probiotics in the food itself. There's not really, and I think it's beneficial to have them in your diet, and I certainly include them in a general healthy balanced diet, but there isn't any research yet to suggest that like having kombucha in your diet every day, as an example, is going to have any significant benefits, and we don't really know whether all those live bacteria in the products actually make it into the large bowel and they survive the acid because your stomach is really acidic. But most of those products are really healthy products anyway. So I think it's all about the context that you use them in. Like kombucha is a really good example. If you're somebody that really likes soft drink, for example, or you're drinking a lot of Diet Coke, then as I said, there's no research to suggest it's going to have this amazing benefit. But maybe trialling some kombucha over using something like that. Like that's an example of how you would incorporate those types of foods into your diet. And those foods also have things called short-chain fatty acids in them, but I don't know if you guys probably aren't. It gets a bit complicated, and you've had a long day of talking, so I might not go into that too much. But yeah.
Just going to ask one question about salt. You had the can of beans and you had no salt, but then you introduced down the bottom anchovies.
Ah, that's a good pickup, well done. So again, early stage of liver disease where you're just having a general healthy diet, as long as you're staying within, there's actually no upper limit now, although there should be, but most people certainly should be having less than 2,400 milligrams of salt per day, which actually adds up really quickly when you are using like canned foods, adding things like anything in a package pretty much. So adding like curry paste or all those sauces, tomato sauce, things like that tend to be really high in sodium. So practically on an everyday basis, you would be trying to use whole foods that aren't in packages. But how I would answer that question would be like sometimes the benefits outweigh. So if you're having a healthy diet and you're not really using too many of the stir-fry sauces and you're not squeezing tomato sauce on everything, if having some canned butter beans in your salad, as long as you're choosing no added salt and you're rinsing them well, is one of the only really high salt products, then that's okay. But if you are in late stage, or like if you have advanced liver disease, which I didn't actually touch on, but there are times where you'll need to have significant salt reductions in your diet if you do develop something like ascites, and then you need definitely less than 1,000 milligrams per day. But again, you'd be working with the individual dietitian to achieve that.
Okay. One more question?
Sorry. So if you go from worst case, then you're becoming better and better, does that mean you can switch back your strict diet to more normal, healthy diet? You have, you know, if your symptoms are
Yeah, I think that's probably a better question directed at Alex, but I think in terms of when dietary recommendations really start to change, it is when you become, when those complications start to arise. So when we notice malnutrition and we notice fluid build-up like ascites, and you become decompensated, which is something we talked about before, that's that point at which those dietary recommendations tend to switch. And at that point, really, you know, it's not going to go back necessarily the other way. We're just going to manage you as best we can until, for example, you would get a liver transplant. So up until that point, though, general healthy dietary recommendations like the Mediterranean diet. Does that make sense? Does that kind of answer your question?
Yeah, you're referring to, say, like transplant setting, or?
No, I think I can speak to that here. So, for example, I was in real bad shape and lost all that muscle and was still rebuilding it. So by this sort of system, I move on to the inverse of what the Mediterranean diet was. Now I'm getting better. So now I trade back, because I'm not on a transplant list whatsoever.
Yeah.
So would I be now switching back to the Mediterranean diet now that I'm getting better?
I think you'd want your weight to be, so when we're talking about like BMI, like muscle mass loss in particular, you'd want your BMI, does everyone know what BMI is? Yeah. Or to be nice and stable for a period of time, to be feeling really well, to be not needing to rely on those protein sources as much. And then absolutely, yeah, you can slowly transition back to perhaps a similar style of eating if you're tracking really well. But typically we'd want your weight to kind of stay where it is. So it's hard for me to say, I guess. It really would have to be, you know, have to do a consult.
Sorry, you got that.
What about using like your whey protein powders and collagen powders and gelatin powders and things like that? You know, like my son is 15-year-old, you know, teenager, and it's just like, oh,
Using everything under the
this
sun.
and you know, you know. So you know, it's a matter of managing getting the food in. They've grown up on an organic diet, a whole food diet, so like they know that. But it's just going through this bit of rebellion side now, and it's just like, okay, how can I get that good food into him in a quick, easy way? So, you know, like your collagen powders and stuff like that.
Yeah, so first of all, I mean, I'm a dietitian, so of course I'm going to say this, but food first is always better, without a doubt. And so, first of all, answering the collagen powder, I get this all the time in clinic. There is no evidence at all to suggest that it's going to be beneficial in terms of kind of healing what we call leaky gut. Sometimes it'll be referred to, which isn't necessarily correct, but having any of those benefits, although it does appear to be somewhat safe. It hasn't shown any negative effects, but it's not something that I would necessarily be recommending. In terms of protein powders, again, I mean, if he's a healthy kid, tracking really well, he really shouldn't need them. You should quite easily be able to get enough protein in the diet through things like your meats, your dairy, and your legumes, lentils, nuts and seeds. So no, I don't think I never really recommend a protein supplement at all unless you're vegan, would be one example, and you are struggling to get enough protein in, or you're an athlete, or you have advanced liver disease, but even then I wouldn't necessarily be recommending a protein powder. So I think in answer to that is maybe seeing a dietitian to make sure that you're getting everything from the diet and getting him on track, but trying to resort as least as possible to supplements.
I understand one thing. I think one thing which I've learned over the years is that the diet's really complicated.
Yeah.
I think it's a lot more. It's so like, you know, we always give general, like as doctors, we give general recommendations. Like I must say the Mediterranean diet 20 times a day. Like I literally, that is the mantra. Right?
Yeah.
But you know, in low processed foods, low carb, low complex, high complex carbs. Anyways, but the problem is, as you pointed out, like I think what I found is although those are good general recommendations, often people's individual needs do vary, and it's definitely not a bad thing to see someone specifically for that, as opposed to just sort of take it on board and just try to Google Mediterranean diet. I found that that's been, although it's good, it's not necessarily the best option for people.
I think Dr. Google for diet is the worst thing that's ever happened, because it just overcomplicates everything, to be honest with you. Half of the questions that I get are because people are just really confused from what they're reading online. And also I think you find like Googling the Mediterranean diet, this is what people usually tell me when they come and see me in practice, is it's all good and well to say have 2 serves of fatty fish per week, but working with a dietitian will mean, well, how exactly do we get that fatty fish into your diet if you've never eaten it, or if you don't like it, or what are alternatives that you could use? So it's all of those, because it is complicated, but it's not, or it shouldn't be, but it's how to put it into practice, which is often, I think, the hardest part, and that's